So lovely to see where everyone's coming from, different part of the country, and even across the border. Thank you for joining us today at Fundraising AI Forum, over lunch or breakfast, depending on where you are. And so, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded indigenous territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, the Coquitlam First Nation, whose territory the Coquitlam BC stand. So as you heard from Ashreya, my name is Judy Chu. I'm currently working as an interim director of leadership giving and Asian giving at Canadian Cancer Society. So very excited to meet you all here live today. And I would be greatly appreciate to receive some of your thoughts, your chat, your feedback, or even your questions. So after this session, I'll be hanging around the lodge and I'll welcome for small group discussion or even a one-on-one meeting invitation, or even connect me on LinkedIn. So to message me that way. So earlier today, you heard from many AI experts to talk about science of the fundraising, such as data mining, data management research, and now we're going to talk about some arts of the fundraising, how to engage in Asian giving. I see that many people joining us today are already fundraising professionals who have experience working with cultural community giving, and some are new for fundraising, but an expert of artificial intelligence. So we'll talk about some of my experience and recommendations working with Asian donors. But since we have so many scientists here, I'm going to start my presentation with some stats and numbers and talk about why Asian giving. Today, Asian Canadians form a significant minority within the population, and over 6 million ethnicity Asians call Canada their home. Based on Census Canada reports, 48% of Canadian residents have an Asian heritage. And this is a much higher proportion than any other major city outside of the continent of Asia. Statistics Canada predicts the number of those with Asian roots will continue to grow at a faster rate than the non-Asian population. Unlike the first Asian or Chinese immigrant generation, such as people from Hong Kong more than 2 decades ago, the dominant sources of Chinese newcomers now to Canada are from mainland China. Most of those newcomers are highly educated, middle class, and some of them have stepped up to a charity work with a number of Canadian causes, often led by their businesses and community group. So where does your Asian donor give? Asian giving by subsector. As in the United States and some European countries, religious organizations always receive the largest share of the total value of donations in Canada. Healthcare ranking at number 2 and followed by social services ranked at number 3. And in comparison, Asian Canadians' giving behavior are influenced by culture and history of Asia, which education is always a priority, followed by healthcare, specifically hospitals, and then followed by religions. So once again, similar to North America's charitable giving, the source of Asian giving are also from these 4 major sectors: individual, corporates, foundations, and plan giving. In Asian cultures, there's a long traditions of individual giving. However, it is not always recognized as philanthropic because many not reported to government or tax authorities, and they do not like public exposure. Giving among first generation Asian Canadians is often private through family, religious, and home country communities. And the pattern of Asian Canadian philanthropy giving are usually tied in a personal connection. So I want you to lock up this word of connection in your head right now because we will talk about it a lot in engaging Asian giving. This giving culture is fast changing among Canadian born Asians and immigrants landed around year 2000. So over the period of 2000 to 2014, nearly 500,000 Chinese immigrants came to Canada, representing over a quarter of Canada's total Asia Pacific immigrants. And more than 50% of Canada's current Asian immigrants are highly educated and skilled in many professions, including engineering, the sciences, research, medicine, pharmacy, law, and higher education. And unlike the first generation, this group is very accustomed to practices of volunteerism and philanthropy. And many of them can comfortably fit in Canadian mainstream society without language or cultural barriers. According to a report from the Global Chinese Philanthropy Initiative, giving by Chinese philanthropists is growing rapidly. The report found that between 2008 and 2014, gifts of at least 1 million from Chinese Americans increased nearly fivefold to 492 million in United States. In September 2014, Harvard University received the largest alumni donation in its 378-year history when alumnus Gerard Chan give 350 million to the School of Public Health. And this trend is also increased in Canada recently. The Vega founder Charles Chang has donated 10 million to Simon Fraser University in BC to create a new institute for entrepreneurship within the BD School of Business in 2016. And Chinese-owned pharmaceutical company Viva Pharmaceutical also donated 1.2 million to the VGH and UBC Hospital Foundations in 2015. And from a corporate perspective, like many Canadian business, Asian-owned Canadian business understand giving strategically can mutually benefit the company and the community. However, rather than being tied to social cause or business objectives, the contribution often reflect the personal beliefs and values of the executives and decision maker. Foundations and grants are also fast growing as well. Many of the public foundations, such as Asian Pacific Foundations of Canada or Chinatown Foundation, are focused on embrace Asian culture and heritage, Asian Canadian business and public conversation. And some of the private Asian-owned foundations fund more diverse of the causes. Just like the Asian Canadian-owned business, the contribution is really reflect the personal beliefs and values of the foundation directors, normally within a family. For plan giving, as many people probably already know that in Asian culture, is very, very private and kind of bad luck when talk about will. And bequest is a way of downward intergenerational property transfer. According to a survey of 500 respondents implemented in Henan and Heilongjiang province in China, 71.14% of parents want to leave their as large a bequest as possible only to their children. Property transfer via bequest by parents affects not only children's behavior in supporting their parents, which is part of the Asian culture, but also affect these children's family members. I'm sure that you heard from either CAGP or AFB webinar or other public resources that plan giving in Asian culture is in its infancy, and it requires a lot of efforts and resources invested in Asian community to raise the awareness, to raise the benefits. As we also know that every crisis, social changes would impact people giving behavior and it's true here now in plant giving as well. We saw that over the past several months last year, interest in plant giving has skyrocketed in North America. This behavior also changed applied to plant giving in Asian community, which we will talk about it as a part of the engaging Asian giving. So how do we engage Asian giving? How do we connect with your Asian donor and soliciting gift effectively? Did you remember the word of connection? So for those of you that in fundraising, I'm sure that you're very familiar with this LAI principle, linkage, ability, and interest. So these are the golden principle of how we identify unqualified donors, especially major gifts and planned donors. These also represent donors' motives of giving. So we want to find their linkage of your organization and your organization's cause. Your donor could be alumni of your university, a patient of your hospital, a participant of a cancer support group. But no matter what's that linkage, there's a connection between your donor and your cause and your organization. This one is specifically important in Asian giving because Asian Canadians are more likely want to know or research about your organization and plan before make a donation rather than giving spontaneously. They're looking for that connection. And of course, giving ability and giving interest are essential elements of fundraising. As we mentioned earlier, many of the Asian Canadian or Asian immigrants are highly educated and skilled in many professions. And then the Asian median annual household income are ranked highest among other ethnicity group. But I'm not saying Asians are rich, let's go after them. Because having a giving ability or capacity doesn't mean your Asian donor would give it to your organization. Once again, they're looking for that connections, the interests that make them to feel they want to give back to your organization, they want to give back to your cause. And if we deep even a little bit deeper and further, you will find that connection also linked to a trust. And trust is the root of building relationship with Asian, whether it's a business relationship or personal. If they don't trust you, they don't trust your work, they don't trust your organization, they're not going to give you their money. And that explains why cold calling normally doesn't really work well with Asian community. And that also due to a series of scandals in Chinese philanthropy, most notably a scandal in 2011 that involves an international charity. Public lost their charity with one organization, and soon enough with the entire nonprofit sector. Therefore, building a strong connection and trust with your Asian donor and cultivating the relationship with trust building and authenticity are a key to engaging Asian giving. Linkage is also important from a peer fundraising perspective. I understand not all charities have the means or capacity to hire an Asian fundraiser to talk to your Asian donor. And sometimes you don't really need to because your Asian leadership volunteer or even your current Asian donor willing to introduce you to their network, their friends, their family, and making an introduction are far more impactful than an Asian fundraiser cold calling your Asian donors during Chinese New Year. So speaking about Chinese New Year, another important recommendation is to have an Asian culture expert to support you or on your team. I understand not all charity have the needs and capacity to really hire a Asian fundraiser to talk to your Asian donor in a full-time capacity. But understanding culture is more important than speaking the language. Sometimes you don't need a full-time staff. Instead, you could hire a consultant who specializes in culture community giving. You could also hire a professional PR firm or marketing firm to help you with your website or mass marketing material design. Believe it or not, sometimes your Asian leadership volunteer will have the profession and understand the Asian culture and help you at the same time. It could help you from review your reading material, online article, give you advice of what to wear in an Asian culture community events. And as I mentioned earlier, education has a long tradition and high expectation in Asian culture. Therefore, a well-written materials in Asian language will add credit to your relationship with Asian donors. But you don't want to use Google Translate for your solicitation letter or website. Because remember, we're looking for the connection, and connection needs emotion. Direct Translate could lose the emotion and the connection, and sometimes a grammar mistake or wrong character or wrong word use are even worse. Additionally, consider to translate your mission program material into Asian languages as well, not just your solicitation materials, especially for the philanthropic projects that appeal to immigrants' interests. Highlight the opportunity that work with your immigrant supporters to create win-win opportunity that help them achieve their philanthropic goal through your organization's program. For example, University Bursary Program for International Students. Another important recommendation is to invite Asian ethnic representation into your organization's leadership. This shows how your organization value Asian constituents by including them in decision-making groups. It could be task forces, senior staff, such as directors, managers, or even your board member or board committees. Today, many nonprofit organizations are embracing diversity as a mission and organization's value. And I know that this afternoon you will hear from two amazing fundraising experts, Maria and Tanya, to talk about the importance of diversity in AI and the nonprofit sector. Now that we have the right people, we have the right material, can we use a cookie cutter style to communicate with all our Asian donors? Not really. Even if we just narrow it down to Chinese, there's a great difference compared to early immigrants from Hong Kong or Taiwan to today's majority immigrants, which are from mainland China. Even within mainland China, there are culture and value differences from east to north. So maybe this is the area that we can incorporate artificial intelligence to help us learn donor behavior, donor interests, and engage donor-centric strategies. But before we do that, remember, there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. Cultural community giving needs more research, cultivation, stewardship to successfully securing a gift. Trust and connection are especially important for building relationship with your Asian donors. Lastly but not least, engage your Asian donor with different ways of giving. Remember, we were talking about plan giving in Asian community was at its infancy. So now I think it becomes a toddler. More and more Asian donors are willing to learn more about estate and gift planning through different communication channels, whether through an estate and gift planning webinar in their own languages or reading your translated plan giving brochure or material on your website. Many of them understand that plan giving is not only about death now, it's not only about will, it's about a long-term plan. Giving to charity not only limited to cash, It can be made through their investment account by donating shares, RSP, and many more options that doesn't even involve writing a will. Believe it or not, buying life insurance are very common for Asian family. But only a few Asian donors are aware that they can make a donation through life insurance as well. So toddlers still have a long way to grow, to learn, and it is our job to communicate with our donors and create awareness of different ways of giving to help them achieve their philanthropic goals. And it makes me even more excited today that there's a trend of creating donor advised fund from major banks in Canada, other than just community foundations. And that gives our Asian donor another communication channel or exposure to the philanthropy world to create a hope, love, and helping others. With that said, this is actually conclude my presentation of engaging Asian giving. I really wanted to thank everyone on this call for this opportunity, and a special thank also goes to the CEO of the Fundometric, Mark Hobbs, for inviting me to this amazing platform. So I welcome your feedback, your questions. I'll be in the launch. Thank you very much, everyone.